What's your scariest camping experience? Story one, I was camping once in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, in a pretty secluded spot with distinct individual campsites. It was in the fall, so dead leaves were all over the ground. When we were settling into sleep, we started to hear these slow, consistent footsteps on the leaves. They would walk around the campsite, circle our tent, just walk all around without any clear goal and without stopping. Obviously, we assumed it was some kind of animal, but when we rushed out with a light, there was nothing. I mean, no sound, no trace of anything. Once we were back in the tent, these footsteps immediately started up again, and they did not come from far away. They started up right next to our tent. We repeated this whole rigmarole probably 3 more times because of how distinct and close and creepy those footsteps were, and we never caught even a glimpse of what was walking around. The next morning, we were sitting by the fire and started hearing the steps again, only to look down and realize it was the sound of multiple small frogs hopping around the campsite. Story two, I was pretty young, went camping with my dad in Alabama. It was late at night. The embers of the fire were dying down. We were about to go to sleep when we heard what I can only describe as a bone-chilling moan in the woods. We looked at each other and decided it was trees rubbing together. But then it happened 2 more times. My dad grabbed the flashlight and I walked behind him with a big stick, determined I would save him if something went wrong. Eventually we discovered a woman lying on the ground, not far from our campsite. She was on a hill with her head facing down, feet uphill, continuing to moan. It turned out she had so much to drink that she could hardly talk, but she was also camping out in these woods with her boyfriend. They had a big fight and he drove away, leaving her alone in the forest. She had seen our fire dying and wanted to give us the rest of her firewood before she left too, but had tripped and was too drunk to get up. We got her back to her campsite and made sure she was not driving anywhere that night. I will never forget that moaning sound though. Story three. Pretty sure 2 guys were going to assault my friend and me. We were teenagers, 16 and 18, and went up alone. We made dinner and were having a good time in the evening when some guy passed by our site in the river. He had a fishing pole, so we were like, whatever. He asked to go through our site to the road, and we figured it was harmless enough and said yes. He stopped and looked around our site and started asking us questions. How old are you? Where are you from? How long are you staying? Typical questions that were none of his business, but we were naive enough to answer. He eventually left and headed down the canyon on the road. A couple hours later, he showed back up with a buddy. Both of these guys were middle-aged, probably mid-40s. They started asking more questions. The original guy walked around and snooped about our campsite. We got an uneasy feeling and were super grateful when they eventually left, but they went up the canyon rather than back where they came from. Another couple hours passed and it was dark. My friend mentioned how she could not hear anything because of the river, and it had her a bit antsy. We talked and it turned out we had both been on edge since the guys left. We had never seen them go back down the canyon. We both had a gut feeling that we needed to leave and fast. Maybe nothing would have happened, but we both felt it. The guys asked all the right questions to know that we would be there alone and defenseless that night. Story four, I was on a camping trip with scouts and my friend and I were put in the same tent as this kid who acted strangely. He was acting up all the time, getting into fights, and showing off how many knives he had. One night we were in our tent playing blackjack, and I guess I said something that angered him because he started yelling at me. That let the scout leaders know we were still up, and they told us to get to bed. I do not know how long I was asleep, but I woke up to him choking me. I thrashed about and tried to get him off me, but I could not focus and was panicking. I remember the tent seemed to be getting darker, and how heavy my eyelids were getting. My chest and head were hurting and aching trying to get me to breathe. But I just felt so tired. I was starting to fade away thinking my last thing I would hear was his laughter when my friend woke up because of me struggling and him laughing and got up and started clobbering the guy. I was part coughing and part breathing once he got off me. My friend screamed for help, and that got the adults' attention. He was yelled at for what he did, and they shuffled around people so that he would be sleeping in a tent alone right near the adults' tents. I got into a tent with my older brother, and I must have woken up 3 times that night kicking and screaming from nightmares of him hurting me. When we all got back from the camp, his parents were told what happened and that he was banned from scouts. They also told my mom, and it must have taken the active will of God for her not to go and confront him. He got banned from a bunch of other activities that we both did, so I did not really ever see him again. I still wake up scared from nightmares of being choked or suffocated, and while I am a pretty sound sleeper, if anyone tries to walk or get close to me while I am asleep, I shoot up awake in panic. I cannot even really nap with my dogs because of it. I do not know if I will ever be able to sleep soundly around anyone ever again. Story 5. Hiking a trail in East Tennessee. Had not seen a soul since leaving the parking lot that morning. Made camp up on top of a rock bluff, 50 yards off the trail as the sun set. Quick dinner, then probably asleep by 7. Around 11, I woke up hearing voices which sounded like muttered German. I listened for a few minutes and I could hear footsteps and the voices coming toward the tent. I woke up my hiking partner, who heard the same thing I was hearing. The footsteps stopped what seemed like 10 feet from the tent, and the same two mumbling voices. I unzipped the tent and looked out, and there was nothing. Got my flashlight, shined around, nothing. After a few minutes, I got back in the tent. We both tried to sleep, and after a few minutes, the voices started up again, and what sounded like someone cutting a tree with an axe. My partner pulled on his boots. We both agreed the sound was 10 feet away to the right of the tent. He unzipped the tent slowly. We were still hearing sounds. He jumped outside with his flashlight, headed in that direction. Nothing. We sat outside the tent for over an hour because there was no way we were going to sleep, but we heard nothing. Eventually, we were both about to pass out, so we went back in the tent and fell asleep. Around 3:30, the axe sound started again. We both just lay there listening. And a few minutes later, we heard the cracking and whooshing sound of a falling tree, heard and felt the thud as it hit the ground. We both jumped up and scrambled out of the tent, and there was nothing. No sound at all. No wind whistling through the trees. No bugs, no frogs, just silence. We packed up everything in minutes, but decided not to leave because the climb back down to the trail was difficult in daylight and too risky in the dark. We sat there until the sun came up without hearing the voices or axe again. We had calmed down somewhat by that point and started searching the area. We probably went 100 yards in every direction from our camp, and there was no sign anyone had been there, and certainly no large, recently fallen tree. Story 6. In college, I did a lot of solo car camping from the back of my truck I owned at the time. I went to a remote public area in the Ozarks and planned to stay overnight. After setting up all my bedding and having dinner and a sugary dessert, I decided to hunker down for the night. Well, about 45 minutes after turning off the light, I started hearing leaves crunching in the woods about 30 yards away. Not really concerned, I wrote it off as an opossum, deer, coyote, or something just moving through the area. However, my imagination started going wild as it always does, and I started thinking of the worst situations. More leaves crunching, but closer. Definitely in the campsite. I usually carry a can of bear spray, but being a dumb kid, I did not think about the fact that I was in an enclosed space until I was ready to use it. More crunching leaves, but further away. I started to relax a little as eventually they disappeared. Nerves completely racked, I tried to go to sleep. I think at some point I got into a really light sleep and woke up about 2 to 3 hours later. It was about 2 in the morning, and there was very obviously something walking between me and the campfire. At this point, a deep, loud, and incredibly scary voice from inside my truck camper asked if I believed in God. I started screaming and turned on headlamps, thrashing, and getting ready to defend for my life. The footsteps ran away and disappeared into the woods as I was in full panic mode. I had to tell myself I hallucinated the whole thing because of the sugary dessert I ate before bed. Still gets my heart racing when I think about it too much to this day. Story 7. We have a lake less than an hour from home, and my daughter's friend had never been camping, so we decided to do a quick overnight there. We, mom and daughter 18 then, camp a lot and like the solitude, so we often try to find the most remote places. No campsite or anything, just drive up and find a space. So we found this nice little peninsula, big enough for about 3 campsites, and it being Sunday, we were hoping the other 2 groups would leave. They did eventually, and we had the place very much to ourselves. As the night went on, we had a nice fire, sang, laughed, I was drinking wine, we were making s'mores. Everything was perfect until we went to sleep. About an hour and the girls were bugging me to wake up because it was raining and we needed to put the cover on the tent. Huge tent, so all hands needed. By now the wind was blowing and we were struggling, but we finally got it covered and it was back to sleep we went. Until a motorcycle, more specifically a dirt bike, at about 2 in the morning started riding circles around the peninsula. Mind you, this is literally a small enough area that only 3 large tents plus 3 cars would fit, and there was nothing else nearby but bushes in the lake. There would be no reason to be there, as it was obvious we were alone. Up, down, around he rode, then stopped. Almost an hour this went on. Up, down, around, and stop, around, and stop, never cutting the engine. I just wanted to sleep, so I went to the front of the tent and unzipped. I looked outside and saw him just staring. So I climbed out of the tent and stared back. It was dark and I could not tell if this creep could even see me, so I went back in the tent, frustrated. The girls asked what he was doing, and when I told them, they got really frightened. I told them I was going to go give him a piece of my mind. They were terrified and demanded I not leave the tent. So I settled back in and waited. Up, around, circle, engine rev, idle, over and over. This went on for at least another hour. I had had it. Down, up, around, all with that annoying blatting motocross sound blasting by our tent back and forth, and stop. I looked out. He was staring again. I was about to go stomping over to tell him off when I got the tingles all down my spine. He was facing directly toward our tent, saying nothing, just still and staring. I realized I had no weapons, no way to protect the girls, and he was between us and the car. I waited. I was outside the tent but had not made a move forward because now instinct and logic had the better of me, and I realized that an aggressive approach was probably the wrong move. I stayed stock still, just like the rider, for what felt like an eternity. Both of us staring. Must have been 20 minutes I stood there. And then just like that, he took off. Drove off the peninsula and out of earshot and never came back. To this day, I will never know what that was about or if I did the right thing. I can only say I am glad I never confronted him. My gut just told me no. As for my daughter and I think I need to buy a gun if we are going to camp alone like this. Story 8. Late one summer or early fall, my husband and I went camping at the beach with his daughter and her fiancé. We had a fun, chill time snacking and watching the sunset, then got in our tents to sleep after dark. I had this awful, uneasy feeling that I just could not shake, but I did not want to be a party pooper. Finally, I said something to my husband, who felt the same way, but also did not want to ruin the trip. After a moment of discussing what to do, he decided to tell the kids we were not really digging it and wanted to go home. In an instant, he was back at our tent. The kids felt the same way. We started packing up immediately as fast as we could. Few words exchanged, but all laser focused on the same task, getting out of there. My stepdaughter and I waited in my car while the guys packed in the last of the gear. As they approached us, a huge, lifted white truck came out of the darkness and plowed through the area we were just settled in not 10 minutes ago. It would have absolutely crushed us. It was a freaky experience for all of us that could have ended so much worse, especially since she had just gotten pregnant with her first baby at the time. We are so thankful to all still be here together. We have not gone beach camping ever since. I do not know what force compelled us to leave that night, but it is worth mentioning that my father's ashes were spread at this beach years prior. It was his favorite place. Story 9. Went camping with my girlfriend about 4-ish years ago in the mountains just east of where we live. We are both a little hippie, so we brought some toys, juggling bags, diabolo, poi, and thought it might be fun to bring out our recently acquired brass singing bowls. We have 3 different sizes that produce different tones, with the middle-sized green bowl being our favorite in both appearance and tone. If you have ever played a singing bowl before, you know they do not just make the tone by themselves, and it can take a little effort to get the tone out cleanly and clearly. In my opinion, that is kind of the fun of the bowls, coaxing the sound out of it. It adds a little bit of necessary skill and makes the singing bowls an instrument with a little exclusivity. The second night out there, after bedding down for the night, I woke up suddenly to hear the green bowl unmistakably singing. My girlfriend was in the tent with me, so it definitely was not her. Again, they do not sing by themselves. They have to be played. So of course the both of us were rightly surprised, perplexed, and admittedly freaked out by the fact that this bowl was singing seemingly of its own accord. She nudged me to see if I was experiencing the same thing she was, looked at me wide-eyed and said if I was hearing this too. I nodded for fear that my speech would cause the bowl to stop. After staring at each other for what felt like an eternity, realistically it was about 3 or 4 minutes, we quietly resolved to make our way over to the zipper flap of the tent and open it just enough to see what was playing our bowl. However, as soon as we started to move, the bowl stopped. And not just like someone stopped playing it and walked away. No, it stopped. The bowl muted. No resonating tone whatsoever. It was like someone had grabbed the edge of the bowl like you would a cymbal on a drum kit and silenced it instantly. After the muting, we rushed ourselves out of the tent in the hopes that maybe we could catch sight or sound of whatever it was that decided to stop by and play with our singing bowl. But alas, nothing was there. No footprints, no trail, no indication that anything at all had been anywhere near the bowl. We still cannot explain what happened that night, and it is one of those stories that even now sends a bit of a shiver down my spine and makes my hair stand a little on end. Whatever played our bowl that night did not feel hostile or angry, maybe curious and playful, but it definitely did not want us to know what it was. Story 10. About 12 years ago, while on a 10-day hunting trip in northern Michigan, we were at a place called Deadstream Swamp. We used to tent it back in these days, and it was about the third week of November, so it was cold and about 6 to 10 inches of snow on the ground. It was time to call it a night. We got in our mummy bags on our cots and had a small battery-operated radio we would listen to while falling asleep. The Michigan backwoods get dark as anything. I mean, pitch black and eerie. I passed right out this night, but got woken up sometime later by my hunting buddy Dave saying my name repeatedly. I was sleeping so good, I literally remember thinking it was the radio playing. Then I took notice to my name, and Dave sounding terrified. I said, "What?" Dave said, "Dude, get your gun. Get your gun." I was all disoriented, but remember saying, "Why? What is wrong?" He said, "Dude, someone is here. Someone is here." Now let me add, we were backwoods campers. We did not stay at state parks or campgrounds, and we were a good 40-minute drive back in the thick Michigan-Huron National Forest from any roads or civilization. We had set up our camp at the end of a very long, dead-end 2-track. We had been there 5 or 6 days at this point and never saw not one other person or even a sign of someone else being out there. So I was like, what is going on? And in my disbelief haze, I mumbled something like, "What do you mean someone is here? What did you order a pizza?" Dave said, "Dude, listen." Finally, I came to enough to realize the radio was off, but I could hear AC/DC blaring through the forest and a faint sound of an old pickup truck blazing up the 2-track towards our camp. I had a big 19-foot tent with a huge rubber tarp draped over it, so it was hard to tell there was a tent there if you did not know it was. At this time, I realized this was wrong, and no one should be driving up to our camp in the middle of the night, so I was reaching for my gun. Now the headlights were moving across the tent while the truck made its way through the winding 2-track and was within 100 yards of our tent. I finally heard yelling over the AC/DC, which sounded like an old drunk hillbilly screaming with a screechy voice, saying something about, "Hey, you neighbors, get your asses out here." At this point, he literally had his truck about a foot away from the door of my tent and was revving his engine. It blew my mind this guy found us or even knew we were there. This was super odd. In all my fear, I racked a shell into my Winchester 20 gauge and screamed, "You better get out of here. I'm not playing around." The engine revved up louder and his truck inched closer to the tent. I thought for sure he was going to run us over. I yelled as loud as I could again that I was not playing and I was about to start shooting. He must have got the message because he backed his truck up and left, but very, very slowly. The rest of the trip had a very odd feeling, and we never figured out who he was or where he came from. Way out by the dirt road where we turned off to get back there were 2 or 3 old mobile home trailers that reminded me of the movie The Hills Have Eyes. Just very dirty. Lots of odd things hanging on the porches and junk everywhere in the front yards like old fridges and junk cars and trash. I am assuming the guy lived in one, but we never found out. Still gives me the creeps thinking about it. I thought I was going to have to shoot him in fear of our lives. It was frightening to say the least. Story 11. A buddy and I were on a camping trip in the Poudre Canyon outside Fort Collins, Colorado. It was late in the season, so all of the campgrounds were closed. We found a random spot off of a random road. Both of us have a ton of experience and had camped all over Colorado and Utah. But something about this particular spot was just off. Almost immediately, we found a blanket wrapped around a deceased skeletal animal. We assumed it was just a pet that someone had thrown out, but it set the mood. We went hiking, climbed up a few hills, and came across an abandoned tent wrapped up in a tree. I was certain we were going to find a body in it, but it was just filled with notebooks and a sleeping bag. We started hiking down the hill and ended up walking down the side, very steep. As we were traversing down, we were hit with the smell of death. Nestled into a tree on the side of a very steep hill was a small towel with something clearly inside of it. We left it be and hiked down. This was probably 200 to 300 feet up the side of a steep hill with a towel and a tree facing the top of the hill, clearly intentionally put there. We downed some bourbon, built up some courage, and hiked back up. Grabbed a stick, opened up the towel. Inside, a very recently deceased owl. Somehow, some way, someone had killed this owl, wrapped it in a towel, hiked up a steep hill off a random mountain road, and stuck it beside a tree. We started a fire, slammed the bourbon, and got out of there in the morning. Story 12. It had just stopped raining, and dinner was on the go. We had to stoke the fire back up quickly, so everyone went to work gathering wood from the forest. Twigs, branches, kindling. The fire was going nicely, tall flames, now to keep adding to it so we could get those coals to boil the water and cook the food. I was in a plastic poncho and turned to tidy the woodpile by the fire when there came a loud shout. "Look out!" I turned around startled and saw nothing out of the ordinary, then heard running footsteps from the side, and before I could turn to look, I got tackled. The poncho got ripped off, up my back and over my head, and as I hit the ground, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a fireball sailing through the air, then landing on the pine needles of the ground ahead. The others ran to it and stomped it out as the camper who tackled me stood and helped me to my feet. My back had been to the fire, and as I was bending over to tidy the woodpile, the bottom edge of the poncho had caught fire, and flames shot up my back. I did not even feel it or know it, but my dad's friend Ted just happened to glance up that moment and see my back go up in flames. And he did not hesitate, just ran and jumped and tore it off split seconds before it would have melted into my back. Saved my life. Story 13. Driving cross country with my dog and planned to camp over in Yellowstone. However, when I arrived, every campground in the park was completely full. I drove the loop a couple times and kept asking, but the sun was going down and there was still no vacancy anywhere. I found an out-of-the-way trailhead parking lot, hitched up my frame pack, and hiked up the trail for a little bit, then off a few yards to the edge of a pasture. Cleared a site, dug a small fire pit in the dirt, and pitched my four-man. Ate a couple hot dogs with my dog, hung all the leftovers and trash in a nearby tree, buried the fire ashes, and climbed into my sleeping bag. So far, not sure it gets better. I woke up to the sound of wolves howling in the distance. Hard to say how far, but a few miles. Thought it was beautiful. Just started to drift asleep again, and the howling was now at the opposite edge of the pasture I was on. Still maybe 3/4 of a mile. They moved quick, but still were not worried. Next time they howled, they were in the middle of the pasture and eventually were circling my tent. It is hard to say how many when it is four-legged animals, but howls and footfalls together, I would say 4 to 5. Both my dog and I lay silently hoping they were just curious. After a very tense couple minutes, they began to break away and finally moved on. After I heard a howling from 3/4 of a mile in the other direction, we both relaxed and eventually fell back to sleep. The sky was still dark the next time I woke up, but I felt like I had slept a few hours more. This time, however, whatever was circling my tent was much larger. The footfalls were audibly large and the breathing could be heard. Although I never saw it, my guess is a bear. He seemed most interested in where I buried the fire. Perhaps some juices from the hot dogs did not fully burn off, but once done nosing around, turned his attention to my tent and circled it a few times. Unlike the wolves, I was slightly more concerned that a large bear would breach the tent if hungry, so I reached for my flashlight and turned it on. From the outside, I imagined the sudden appearance of a large glowing green dome was startling as the bear immediately froze in place. It seemed to be enough to make it reevaluate whatever it was thinking as it soon began moving away. I did not sleep another wink, but the sky was now starting to lighten. After an hour of listening carefully, I stuck my head out of my tent and looked around, all clear. Light rain started to fall, so what would have been a hasty pack out was even hastier. Collected everything and headed back to the truck. Managed to find a campground with a vacancy that morning. Insult to injury, after hanging my damp tent up to dry on site, a ranger came by and asked where I stayed the previous night, as they had a record of me entering the park but not checking into a camp. I lied and said I slept in my truck in a parking lot and got a ticket. The rest of my time in the park was fantastic, and I ended up in Portland, Oregon after another week of camping my way across without any other incidents. Story 14. Boy, do I have some stories. I have been doing 3-day to week-long deep backcountry camping, usually either solo with my pup or with my best bud, for about 15 years. Most of these scary situations happened early on, within the first 2 to 3 years, when my friend and I were young, foolish, and obviously invincible. On one occasion, in southern Colorado, we had just summited a peak pretty late in the day, and by the time we were halfway down, it had gotten too dark to see too far in front of us. Our camp was set up much lower down the mountain, but we were scrambling over boulders and crags on a steep incline in pitch black dark, so we just said forget it and decided to bush camp. Literally in a bush. There was this shrub on the side of the mountain that looked like it would be decent enough to camp in. It formed roughly a semicircle with an opening in the middle where we could sleep in a way that felt walled off and protective. So we laid down close by each other for warmth and managed to doze off. Sometime in the middle of the night, my buddy woke me up asking if I heard that. I listened and could hear something walking around outside the bush. A weird, guttural growling noise. Not deep, just weird sounding. We stayed absolutely still and kept listening, hoping whatever mountain thing it was would just move on. It did not. It kept poking around the perimeter of the bush, and it sounded big. Eventually, it made its way over to where the semicircle opened up to the inside, and it was so pitch black out that we could just make out a mass, but had no idea what it was. We were completely frozen, just staring ahead. My buddy whispered what that was, and I slowly grabbed my phone, shone the light at it, and saw that it was a mountain lion. It looked huge, but for all we knew, it could have been a baby. It growled at the light and made a quick movement, like crouched down suddenly, and just kept staring and doing that weird growling thing. I have no idea what came over me. Fight or flight kicked in, and I guess the part of me that took over had realized there was nowhere to flee. So I slowly grabbed the machete next to me, unsheathed it, and somehow I jumped up and immediately started screaming and put my hands up in the air and started swinging the machete around wildly. Whatever I did worked, and it ran off really quick, darted off across the mountain into the night. Needless to say, we got up and made the middle of the night trek back to our camp, which took another several hours. About a year after that, my same friend and I had the idea to take a week-long kayak trip down the Arkansas River, only we did not have a kayak, and both being college students at the time could not really afford one. So naturally, we bought a two-person inflatable kayak for like $60 and figured we would be good. And we mostly were. We punctured it on a submerged tree our second day on the river, but we patched it and continued on. On the third day, we suddenly realized we were going down the river right through hunting grounds at the height of hunting season. There were occasional gunshots going off all around us. At the time, it felt like it just added to the adventure. But the third night or early fourth morning is where things got really weird, and which I still do not really have an explanation for to this day. We kept waking up in the middle of the night to relight the fire outside of our tent. It was deathly cold, and we also thought it might help signal to hunters that humans were out here. Maybe do not shoot us. Around 4 in the morning or so, when it was still pitch black, but soon to be getting lighter, we were both outside feeding the fire. Something caught my eye to the left of us in the woods. Some kind of light or something reflective. It seemed to move. A deer's eyes, I thought at first. I did not really think much of it until I kept seeing it, and something just seemed off. I did not say anything at first, and then right as I was about to ask my friend if he saw it, he said, "Hey man, You see that thing over there? What is that? And that is when we realized we had both been watching this thing. The odd thing is that it was just one light source. It was not like two reflective eyes. It was not emitting a ray of light like a flashlight. It just seemed reflective the way an animal's eyes would reflect light and appear to light up. It was like that, but it was only one round object, and it was meandering slowly through the woods not too far off from where we were. It looked like an eye reflecting light and looking right at us. Confused and curious, I stood up, grabbed my small weak flashlight, shined it over towards it, and started walking slowly towards it. "Hello," I called out. "Nothing. Anyone over there? We are just camping here and about to head off." No response, but every time I spoke, that object stopped moving, and then it would start moving again. I could hear crunching where it was moving across or through the foliage. I could not make out a shape or body form. It just looked like something roughly the diameter of a flashlight looking over at us. Curious still, I kept walking closer to it. It stopped moving. The more I looked at it, the more it really did look like a flashlight, but like one where the bulb was so low and dim and on its way out that there was no light diffusion. Either that or a really big singular eyeball that seemed to be reflecting light from some unknown light source. We were both still and staring at each other, neither of us making a move. It felt like we stayed that way for about 5 minutes, but it was probably realistically a minute or less. Whatever it was, it had been moving closer. It started off probably about 100 feet behind us to the left and was now probably 30 to 40 feet. When it did move, it kind of bobbed up and down in an erratic fashion. Similar, I think, to what it might look like if someone was holding a flashlight and walking through a forest over twigs and logs and rocks. I took another step forward, really straining my eyes to try and make out what that thing could be up ahead of me through the trees. As soon as I did, this thing, whatever it was, started moving straight towards me at a very high speed, whereas before it was slowly meandering and bumbling around. This time it seemed intentional and fast. I ran in the opposite direction, grabbed my friend, ran over to where our little nylon inflatable kayak was tied to a tree by the river, cut the rope, and we paddled away as fast as we could. We did not even look behind us, we were just frantically paddling. We left our tent and food and bags behind and just took off. When day broke later, we went back for our stuff, and everything was right where we had left it, untouched. Neither of us noticed any foot or hoof prints. We both saw the same exact thing and had the same exact experience. And neither of us today has a satisfying explanation for what that was. Aside from these two, there were countless other experiences that were creepy, like road tripping and car camping, and pulling into a remote place out near Black Mesa Canyon around midnight, only to discover it was a creepy abandoned church camp that had huge padlocks and chains covering the doors to the various cabins, red spray-painted symbols, and huge crosses turned upside down. Bunk beds inside were over on their side, and things were generally very creepy and giving strong no-thank-you energy. Story 15. In high school, my friends and I used to do a lot of camping at Ragged Point before it had bathrooms and signs and such. It was basically a clearing under trees, a few yards away from the edge of the cliffs. It was a local spot mostly, and we never saw anyone out there when we went. We would bring alcohol that we were too young to have and hang out. We would set up our little village of tents and do all the things we could not with parental oversight. One night, I think we had been there for 3 nights already and had not seen anyone else. It started raining, so we mostly retreated to our tents and went to sleep. In the early morning hours, we started hearing distant drums, no talking, just really deep rhythmic drums, slowly getting closer and closer. We were a mixed group of teenagers in the pitch-black, stormy night, alone. It sounded to the scared little kids we were like sacrificial drums coming our way. At least that is what my boyfriend at the time concluded, and once the idea had been introduced, that is what I thought too. Whispers from tent to tent ensued, but we were not all that close together, because how could we get busy if we were? We were also still a bit tipsy. Some people panicked and fled their tents to go to the biggest tent. I convinced my boyfriend to stay inside our tent initially. Better not to flock together and make an easy single target like the character in the horror movie who panics and gives away their position. Nobody slept much that night. The drummers stopped just out of sight but kept up until dawn. Once it got light, we wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. We threw all our things together as quietly as possible and debated on the safest way to get from the cliffs to our cars, which would take us past the unseen threat. It turned out a group of hippies with large drums had decided to go camping in the middle of the night in a storm without tents. They had just reached the tree line and stayed there, drumming away. They did not even wake up when our huddled group scurried past, and we started laughing from relief. That was terrifying at the time, but one of our favorite stories to share in the years since. Story 16. A few years ago, my girlfriend at the time and I wanted to take a road trip to Bryce Canyon. We live in Southern California, so we took a week off from work to have time to drive up, camp a few days, and drive back. We drove to the national park without incident, and when we were there, we discovered that it was packed, and there was not an open campsite. We were novices. So we drove out of the park and a county over, about 30 to 40 minutes away from the park, there was a dirt road that went off on the side, and we decided to see where it led. As we followed the road, it got rougher and rougher, to the point where we slowed down to deal with the rocks and unevenness. After an hour of this, and to our relief, we saw signs for a campground up ahead. I do not remember the campground name, but it was a real place and it was not too shabby. There was hardly anyone there, and it was pretty big. We picked a campsite and set up. No one charged us for anything. No one said anything. We had a couple of good nights there. Now the scene is set and on to the unsettling part. On the third evening there, at about 4 in the afternoon, my girlfriend and I were at our campsite and had just finished cleaning our bowls and utensils and were putting them away. We heard faint but close rustling, and a doe appeared from behind a tree about 15 feet away, very close and coming closer. My girlfriend moved very slowly towards her bag, which had her camera, which was in the tent behind her, to her right. The deer was not frightened and did not get all that close, maybe 10 feet away, and my girlfriend was able to get a picture of the doe. Then the deer walked away slowly into the woods, and my girlfriend and I looked at each other, and for whatever reason, we both had the same thought: let us follow her. We followed the deer, keeping pace but walking slowly behind her, and trailed her maybe 10 minutes outside of the campground. And my girlfriend was able to get some great shots of the deer walking through the woods with sun rays. As we were looking at this amazing photo she took, we looked up at the deer and it was gone. In front of us, forest. Behind us, forest. All around, just forest, with no way of telling which way we came from or where to go. We turned around to walk back the way we came, but we did not recognize anything. It was quiet too, not even birds. We could not hear people at all. We were a 10-minute walk away from the campsite. We should have heard someone, right? We tried to retrace our steps, but we did not recognize anything. And the sun was going down, and it was starting to get cold. So we started picking up the pace, lightly jogging, and eventually we had to pull out our phones to see where we were going. We eventually saw a campfire through the trees and went there. The people there helped us realize where we were, which somehow put us on the opposite side of the campground, and I have no idea how we got so turned around. It took us another 45 minutes to find our campsite, forever making me mark my path on trees now. It is surprising how easy it is to get lost. We were only lost for about 3 hours, but we were so confused and disoriented. It sounds simple as I read and edit this, but it was scary. Story 17. Years ago, me and 2 guys went camping in the middle of nowhere. We rented out a spot, no bathrooms, no pass. Around 11 at night, we pulled up to the area where our map said our spot was. It was pitch black, and we could not tell what marked it. We ended up just setting up a tent in a random area and went to sleep. The next day, we planned on going for an 8-hour hike. No trails, no cell service, hardly any food and water. Guys do not always plan well. About 4 hours into the hike, we got to an area where a bunch of fallen trees were on top of each other, and walking around it would have been about a mile, so we decided to try climbing over it. After climbing the fallen trees for a while, I decided I could not get all the way over and said we should head back. My 2 friends said they would finish getting over it and see a river and then come back in 15 minutes. So I went back by myself, waited 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, nothing. I started calling their names and heard nothing, could not call or text them to see if they were coming back. It was turning into evening, so it was almost getting dark. I looked to my side and saw a tree with a plaque on it saying a family name and some years in the 1900s. Keep in mind, we were 4 hours deep in a forest with no paths and had been hiking through mud and trees and hills and complete nature. So I was in awe that there had ever been a house where I was standing. This made me freak out. It was getting dark. I was alone with no food, water, or cell service, and I had no idea how to get back. So I turned around and just started going straight. After walking for a bit, I started freaking out, still clueless as to where I was or where my friends were. I tried calling 911 to let them know my general location based on where we booked the campsite. I was not worried about my physical condition, but I was worried that once it turned dark, I would go insane because of animals and being lost outside on my own. Several calls did not go through because I had no service, but finally one went through. I talked back and forth with the person, but about a minute into the call, I responded to a question and waited for a response, but they did not respond back. I looked at my phone and it was off, did not say call failed or anything. It was just as if I had pulled it out of my pocket to use it. Overthinking again, I thought I had hallucinated the entire call and was speaking to nobody. Eventually, I came across a small canal of water we had to cross to get to where we were, so I knew I was going in the right direction. I looked to my right and saw my friend in his bright blue shirt and shorts and immediately ran to them. I got very lucky coming across them at the same time as they got there. Eventually, we got back to the car and went home. The police called my friend's phone and had me speak to them to call my parents and say I was okay. I probably overreacted to being alone in the woods, but thankfully everyone is all right now, and I can tell my story of the time I called 911. Story 18, I grew up camping and doing backpacking trips with my family all over the Sierra Nevada mountains. Being very comfortable and experienced in the hills, I started doing wilderness solo hikes when I was in my early 20s. Some of them would last for weeks and would involve things like my dad dropping me off at a trailhead outside of Yosemite and picking me up somewhere like Smith Valley, Nevada 3 weeks later. I always had a GPS locator with a way to contact my family, and my routes were very well planned. I always take a pistol with me, and the first 2 rounds are always snake shot because rattlesnakes are very common in the area. So I was doing a hike across the Ansel Adams Wilderness with no tent, just a sleeping bag under the stars. 3 days into the trip, I was sitting by a small lake as the sun was going down, and I was getting ready to settle in for the night. But just as I made the decision to stand, I looked up and there was a huge mountain lion standing about 20 feet from me. The next few moments can only be described as awkward. I calmly sat back on my rock and unholstered my pistol, but made no sudden moves. I did not want to shoot the animal, and I doubted 2 rounds of snake shot followed by a few 38s would really do a lot. If it came to that, hopefully it would at least give it an attitude adjustment, or the sound would scare it away. So here I was about 40 miles from any sign of civilization, and I started talking to the lion. It was all I could really think to do, so I started telling it about that day's hike and some of the things I had seen. I talked about the weather and asked if it knew any good places to grab a bite, preferably something not bipedal. This conversation went on for maybe a minute, as the lion paced very slowly, never breaking eye contact. Then after what felt like eons, it just casually turned and walked away. I sat there talking for a good 20 minutes before the adrenaline started to wear off, and I was suddenly exhausted. Sleeping was difficult, especially trying to hold a knife in one hand and a pistol in the other, but once my eyes were closed, it seemed like an instant. Then the sun was back up. As I got closer to the end of the trip, an unexpected and unusually high heat wave came in. The temperature was over 105 degrees at 10,000 plus feet elevation. Water sources seemed to dry up overnight. I knew where some natural springs were located, but they were off my route or were around 20 miles away. Without exerting more energy than I needed to, I still arrived at my rendezvous point a full day early. A tire blowout led to my dad being almost a day late, and the water source at the pickup spot was now bone dry. So I had about 60 to 72 hours in 100 plus weather at elevation without water. I was able to get a tiny bit of water from a solar still I made and wrapping a bag around some plants, just enough to stay alive. By the time my dad got to me, I was having full-on hallucinations and was in pretty bad shape. Luckily, he showed up with a case of sports drinks, vitamin water, a cooler filled with ice packs and protein bars. I got checked out by a doctor in Carson City just to be safe. The forecast had nothing about the heat wave and water was abundant until after it hit, so there was nothing I could have done to better prepare for that situation. Definitely a terrifying trip, and after many more adventures, my wife refuses to let me do long wilderness trips alone. Story 19. Not as creepy as the rest on here, but in the moment I cannot explain the feeling I got. My girlfriend and I were on a road trip down through California. It was getting late, and we were tired, so I found a nice quiet beach on my map to camp at. We got there, set up a fire, had dinner, and enjoyed the sunset. It was actually very nice after a long day of driving, but as the sun went down, I started to get this awful feeling like something was wrong. But I wrote it off as being tired, so we went to bed. After lying in our tent tossing and turning for about an hour, the feeling got worse until I was on the brink of panic. I cannot really explain it, but it was like we were not supposed to be there. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming to pack up and leave. Eventually, I told my girlfriend we should go, and that something just did not seem right. So after packing up in the pitch black, with only our phone flashlights and the moonlight only making my feeling worse, we got to the car. We had to drive down a dark, desolate, partially flooded road to get out of there, and we saw a very dirty-looking man walking down the road towards the beach, and he stopped and stared at our car as we drove past with the most blank expression I have seen a human make. Story 20. Not quite camping because we were catfishing and were not staying the night there, but we were there for hours in the dark and had lit a campfire. So close enough. My brother, my husband, and I all decided to go catfishing one night. As usual, we got there around dusk, picked out spots, and gathered firewood before dark. Night fell. It was a breezy early summer evening, and the sky was cloudless and full of stars, but it was a new moon, so still quite dark. We were fishing, not catching more than a few perch, and it was getting close to 1 in the morning, so we were starting to talk about packing up. But first, the guys headed downriver a short ways, only about 50 yards, maybe less, to check a few other spots. I stayed by the fire and decided to lie down a little and enjoy the quiet. A few minutes went by and I heard my brother call out, asking if those were flashlights. I sat up and looked where he was pointing, a spot upstream and across the water past me. Flashlights would be odd because of the location and time of night. Anyone who would be out there would have already been there. There were 3 little round lights, and they did look like flashlight beams, but not really. For one, they were very concentrated and circular. There was no beam. That part of the riverbank was also a very steep, muddy cliff full of brush, so it was weird that there was someone there when there were at least half a dozen easier ways to approach, and the lights were not moving right. They were erratic, but the movements were smooth and did not bounce like someone walking down a cliff would be moving a flashlight, and the movements were in figure 8 patterns, one breaking off and moving to the side before rejoining the others. We watched for a minute, commenting how weird they were. But if it was another person, we needed to know because they were not getting closer, and apparent flashlights just pointing at us was unsettling. So I moved over to where they were sitting, and my husband and brother took off at a brisk pace toward where the lights were. I was watching the weird things, and as the guys got closer, the lights started getting really strange. One vanished completely before reappearing not 30 seconds later in the top of a pecan tree that had to have been 15 feet tall at least. The other 2 split, one heading upstream where the guys were about to round a cluster of brush before they hit the water's edge and could see the other bank clearly, and the third hovering toward me, but then back. The guys rounded the brush, and as soon as they did, the lights flashed once, and all of them blinked out suddenly. The guys were peering across with their own flashlights. I could see the beams faintly from where I was, but they saw and heard absolutely nothing. We never heard anything at all. No brush crackling or twigs snapping, no water splashing. They headed back, and we all unanimously agreed that was strange, and it was time to leave. Multiple visits to that spot afterward, and it still produced some fish for us in the daylight. But when night hit, we would never get a single nibble. We still talk about it sometimes, and we still have never figured out what those lights were. We tried scaling that bank at a later date in the daytime, and it was not possible at that exact location because of the steep cliff and dense brush. You can get from that side to the river, but you have to come out in a spot about 30 yards upstream and further back. No explanation, and no, it was not fireflies. They did not flicker and were blue-white. Story 21. Not my story, but a friend of my brother. We will call him Mike. So Mike likes to hunt, and when I say hunt, he really likes to go far out into the wilderness to hunt. On one trip to somewhere in Idaho, I forget exactly where, he had already been hiking into the woods off trail for days at this point. He was miles and miles away from the nearest trails, out in the middle of nowhere. As I recall, on the sixth day, he came across a river. He spotted two other guys out there by the river who were also carrying firearms. But as he put it, they did not exactly look like hunters and were not carrying hunter rifles. But they were carrying. He was nervous about them, but he said it is proper hunter etiquette to let other hunters know you are out there if you come across each other, just to try and avoid shooting each other. So because he was nervous and did not want to startle them, he did not want to just yell out and say, "Hey guys." He said because they had not seen him yet, he snuck back into the woods a bit and started making deer calls as a non-threatening way to let them know someone else was out there. His plan was to do that so those guys would hear another hunter out there, and then he would walk out into this one clearing and act like he just then saw them and greet them. He was making these deer calls and walking toward the clearing. He was planning on making his presence known, but before he even got there, these guys were on him, guns drawn. So he was freaking out, wondering what they were doing the inner monologue of regret, knowing he had a bad feeling and should have stayed away. They told him to put his gun down so they could all have a chat and had him drop all his gear off under a tree, then asked him to walk out to that clearing by the river. From there, they questioned him for about 30 minutes. Essentially, they wanted to know what he was doing out there and how he got to that spot. They asked him a lot of personal questions, too. He said he felt like he was being interrogated the whole time. Whenever he would try to ask them something, they would just say they were out there hunting too, but that it was private land he was on. He knew for sure he was not on private land, that it was public land, but he also knew that technically in the area he was in, he should not have been hunting. He thought the guys could have been rangers for a moment, but was pretty sure they were not based on their gear and lack of ever identifying themselves by name or authority. He was sure they were not state or federal authorities because he got the feeling that during the questioning, they were trying to figure out if he was an authority of some type. For a while, he was not sure if they were going to let him go, but after questioning him for about 30 minutes and then going through all of his gear, they told him to head back the direction he came and not come back around that area again. The strangest part is that he says he could see a compound through the trees on the other side of the river, a compound big enough for more than a dozen people to live there, but they were just out there in the middle of nowhere. To this day, he thinks he came across some secret hideout of some militia or anti-government group. Story 22. Around 5 years ago, me, my brother, and my dad went camping in Maine. We were vacationing all around North America. My dad always had this idea that he wanted to do something like camping ruggedly and isolated, like having to forage your own food and having to survive your own way and basically become a hermit. We drove through loads of random, out-of-the-way wilderness when my dad stopped the car and announced that he had found the perfect spot. It was near a medium-sized body of water and honestly looked really nice. As we were unpacking our RV, my brother told me that he could swear he could see someone standing on the opposite side of the water just staring at us. I playfully insulted him and confidently remarked that nothing was there. A little while later, probably around 3 in the afternoon, I glanced over at where we parked the car. I saw a figure of a man looming by the car, head turned in our direction. This time I was really freaked out and subtly tried to alert my brother. The shape noticed what was happening and ran swiftly away in the opposite direction. We told our dad about our individual instances with whatever it was, and he tried to convince us that we were being silly. My brother went along with him and pretended to calm down, but he was even more freaked than me. Me and my brother shared a tent, and we went inside it to calm down. We stayed there for the rest of the day to try and take our minds off of it. Sometime during the night, we awoke to a horrible scraping noise, as if a machine was crawling along the floor. My brother ran out to investigate the noise, and when he saw what it was, he beckoned me out. A huge gash was bored into the side of the RV underneath one of the back windows. My dad was extremely scared by this point, and he asked us if we wanted to just leave the tents where they were, drive to a local hotel, and come back in the morning. We agreed to that option, and that is exactly what we did. We never found out how it happened, who the man was, or why it happened. Story 23. 2 summers ago, me and my girlfriend backpacked 8 miles into a very remote part of the wilderness around Mount Adams in Washington. We had two terrifying things happen, one with a person and the other with weather. We got to camp by a lake with a dead forest, so the dead trees were very rigid and dry. There was only one other tent set up across the lake, but we never saw anyone at that camp, which matters later. Within the hour, a huge thunderstorm started rolling in the distant hills, completely unexpected. We had checked the forecast, and thunderstorms are rare in the Pacific Northwest. We secured our tent as best we could, dug a small trench since it was about to downpour, and tried to be in a safe zone away from the dead trees, which was not entirely possible. Wind picked up, rain started, lightning struck everywhere in the distance. We climbed into our tent and bunkered down riddled with anxiety. This whole time we never saw anyone at the other site securing their camp for the storm. It was very weird. The storm hit hard, nightfall was upon us, we heard dead trees snapping all around, lightning lighting up everything as clear as day, rain hammering onto our tent. We were terrified for our lives out of fear of the dead trees falling or being blown onto us. There was nowhere safe to go without hiking out miles. Eventually we fell asleep as the storm slowed down. Then the second scary part. We woke up to a very distinct flashlight being shined on our tent getting very close. It was one of those moments where your stomach turns inside out. I yelled out to whoever was there, and the light immediately turned off and was not seen again. The rest of the night was awful, and the next morning we never saw anyone at the other camp still. It looked deserted, but someone had clearly been snooping around our tent the night before. To this day, it makes me uneasy thinking about it. Story 24. This happened when I was 13 at a summer camp. On the second last night before the week was over, we were supposed to camp on a field next to the hotel the summer camp was staying in. It was a Wild West-themed camp. I was in the bandits group, and the animators put us through a lot of tough, borderline, illegal, and intense stuff. We already had to go on a trip in groups all alone for the entire day. Just imagine 6 adults sparsely spread through a forest, allowing about 50 children to wander around the said forest for 10+ hours straight. On top of that, on the last stretch of the journey, we were supposed to go uphill for about 500 meters, turn right, and go downhill. But at one point it started raining, and it got so bad we could not see further than 10 meters. So we all turned on our flashlights to be able to see each other in the dense rain. Lightning struck like 20 meters away from us, so we all threw our backpacks away and lay flat on the ground until it got better. I was face down in the mud for 10 minutes straight. Then when the lightning stopped, we made the turn and were supposed to go downhill. But due to the rain, the slope was impossible to walk down, so we had to take our raincoats off, use them as sleds, and we tried to get down from the slope to the cottage as fast as possible, still in dense rain. That was the craziest experience of my life, as I stood on the top of a hill trying to make signals with my flashlight down to the cottage when I did not even know if we made the right turn or not, possibly being lost in a storm. So anyway, we had a big campfire in the middle of the camp. On that day, we all helped in cutting down trees, and they let us light a fire. I was supposed to be on the first rotation of camp guardians for about an hour, but I failed to get a whistle, so I was sent to just join all the other kids. In the middle of the night, at about 3 in the morning, I woke up to the animators running around with giant sticks, screaming, insanely waking us all up. We were all in our pajamas and sleeping bags in the middle of a field, and we all climbed out of our tents. The animators told us to scream as much as we could, and we all joined in. We thought it was some sort of prank, so we just did what they told us. Turns out a mama bear was passing through the field about 50 meters away from the camp. We managed to scare them off. That entire camp was wild.